Hello everybody, Justin from Playing Board Games here, and today I have another deck list for you, continuing off where I did my Wilson deck for all the Hemlock Vale investigators. We're here with Kate Winthrop for Survival Support is the name of the deck. With this series, that I'm going to be continuing after I'm done Hemlock Vale, I'm looking at each investigator, getting my initial idea for what I would build a deck for them on paper, and then throwing that deck out. And instead, I'm looking at a deck that would be like my second or third choice for what I do with the investigator. Something that I would say is like not unconventional, but just like a little bit odd for what I would normally do. And then I'm sharing these ideas with you as I try to make the decks as efficient as I can possibly make them. This deck is a support deck. That's why it's called Survival Support, where Kate Winthrop is using her survival technique to her advantage, dropping down helpful cards on locations and picking them back up again. When she isn't doing that, she's grabbing clues and making the game the best time she can for her allies. So this deck, we're going to get to the card in specifics in a few. By the way, you can also find the deck list down in the video description if you do want to go at your own pace. But this deck is all around survival technique, which is a new card from Hemlock Vale that basically allows you to pick up cards that were on a location and put them back into your hand. We're doing this to just replay a few cards over and over and over again that support the team or give the team more power or advantage, while also just generally being a flex support that support often wants. Expansions for this deck, you need a core set, Dunwich Legacy Investigator, Path Carcosa Investigator, Circle and Dun Investigator, Dreamer Investigator. We also need Innsmouth Conspiracy Deluxe expansion, which notably isn't out yet. It is a pretty easy card to proxy if you don't have it, especially for the old cycle of cards, which luckily now at the point of recording this video only exists for Innsmouth. I think proxying those cards is an okay way to go if you're waiting for the new one. But then we also have Scarlet Keys and the Feast of Hemlock Vale, and then also the Harvey Walters starter deck. So, you know, just a little bit of everything, as this often goes in ARKHAM. There's a lot of good cards all over the entire collection, and I don't limit myself for these videos. So that's kind of what we're looking at for this breakdown here. We're going to stop very briefly at the level 0 deck. So if you don't know who Kate is, she's a 2/4/2 investigator. She has the Flux Stabilizer, which allows her to put clues on it, which allows her to get her Aetheric Currents or Yuggoth or Yoth events, and then also gives her Unexpected Courage whenever she places a clue on a science or tool asset, which is why we have the stars next to all those assets, because they are science or tool cards. Notably, you'll notice right away, we're not really taking advantage of that too much. It's kind of value on top of our value, but we're here to support, which means that we don't need to go super hard. So you can pick up a few clues, save them for your failed experiment, for example, or alternatively, you can save them for Mythos cards that might hurt you, and, you know, survive that way. So we're not really, like, while Kate's ability does exist, we're not going too crazy with the deck. Into the upgraded version here, you can see where this deck's going to go. We have still stars for whenever there is a science or tool asset that we can play, but you can see that we're going to be hopping into Farsight when this deck goes all of its way, and taking advantage of a lot of the events that we have. If you don't know what a support deck generally qualifies as, at least in the description for how we talk about them on our channel, they are not responsible for the main source of getting clues. They are responsible for helping everyone win, while also, helping everyone win as more efficiently, like basically adding to the efficiency in which people play, or keeping them alive, making things easier, or alternatively, grabbing clues or dealing with small enemies when they come up. Like, you just kind of do a little bit of everything. So it's kind of like a flex deck, but also leaning more on support. This doesn't mean you can't play this deck in 2 players. I think you would need to make some modifications for this deck to work more consistently in 2-player. But I still think it is possible to do a deck like this in 2 players, because I've done decks like this in 2 players. I kind of just know how it goes. But see, the game plan itself is actually pretty simple, and the cards are pretty basic once we get into it. So why don't we dive in and just start picking about the cards piece by piece. First thing we got here is Survival Technique, is the first card I want to talk about. This card is the namesake of our deck, but luckily, having it in play doesn't make or break it. I know that sounds kind of crazy. The namesake of our deck, but we don't need it in play. We want it in play, but we don't suffer if it's not in play, if that makes sense. It's one of those things where it's a value engine. It allows us to take advantage of other cards in a variety of ways, but it's not going to be like the crux of our deck succeeding or failing depending on when we get it into play. Obviously, we want to get it on as soon as possible so we can start doing all the fun things with it. However, it's one of those things where this deck is kind of amalgamation of two things. It's the survival technique deck, but also it's card draw and big hands, so we can consistently use our survival technique to get extra value. That's what survival technique is. It's just a value engine. So the key to success is knowing what to grab and when. And by that I mean grabbing off the location, because that's kind of what it does. It has the bottom text too on it, so the bottom text on the card, we're not worrying about that too much in this video or in this deck. We're looking at the top lightning roll ability, which is choose a card you own that's attached to your location and exhaust survival technique and add that card to your hand. Notably, it isn't a draw, which will matter for some cards we're going to talk about in a bit, but you do add that card to your hand. What I mean by the key to the success of the survival technique is knowing what cards to grab and when. Let's say, for example, you have 3 cards on your location. You can only pick up one of them each turn with a survival technique. If you have 2 survival techniques, you can grab 2 cards, and this decision becomes a lot easier. But because it exhausts, you need to figure out the order in which that you grab your cards is going to be the key to figuring out when you can take advantage of these cards again and what the priority for picking up those cards is. We're going to talk about those cards in a second. I'm just talking about survival technique as a blanket card right now. This card also has some sneaky synergy with Farsight. That's because it allows us to pick up a card from a location. We can pick it up to fill our hand size up. So we can use it to pick a card up, get up to the 8 cards we need, and then we can play an event with Farsight, which I think is a really cool synergy that can happen. And as I said, because you're going to want to be cycling through locations in this card, following your team to soften locations where possible, this means that it's like it'll be harder to work in 2-player. Following this deck, you might need to make some modifications. This deck is designed for 3 or 4 players, as support decks usually are. But because you can consistently keep your Farsight active, you're able to make up for the tempo that you would lose in playing these support cards generally in 2-player. The goal with this deck is to get on a location, drop down our good cards, have everyone else finish everything they need to do on this location, pick them all up, do it again at the next one. You're basically following around and dropping down the cards when needed. At a certain point in the scenario, you're able to shift to leave certain cards behind when you know what you should be expecting and looking forward to in the end. And that's what I mean when the key to success is knowing what cards to grab and when. And it's kind of hard to know until you've played the scenarios, played the deck out, and try them out. But we can at least talk about the cards here. So these are the 3 events that we're going to be repeatedly using with survival technique to pick up and then play again and again. Barricade locks hunter enemies out of locations. It doesn't stop non-elite hunter enemies, but we're not going to worry about that too much. So this allows players to find a safe haven or forgive just some time to breathe. Enemies can still spawn at the location during the Mythos phase. I decided to not add the upgraded version, even though you could if you wanted to. But this stops it from basically just hunkering down a location. Everyone gets there. Alternatively, you can set up a safe haven for people to move into, as it only gets discarded when someone leaves. And likewise, if someone is going to leave, just pick up your barricade before someone does, and then you can get the value out of the barricade again. Map the Area is the next card we have here in this collection of cards. Whenever you're parked at a location, this makes all the tests easier. Notably, it has a great ability to work with Kate Winthrop's signature weakness, because hers is a Brain 3 test, and this becomes a Brain 2 test with the card. So really nice thing to work with here. Makes everything easier. Shroud, weaknesses, treachery tests, fighting enemies, just all this stuff becomes a lot easier. And then the last card that we're looking at picking up and putting back down is Shortcut 2. This one allows people to move out of things for free, and it's also fast, so it's very easy to pick up and play again and again and again and again. You can also be a little bit cheeky, where you can, as a lightning bolt, you can play Shortcut, have someone move out of the location, because it's a lightning bolt. The only thing is you have to play it during your turn, so this is all during your turn. You then pick up the Shortcut with your survival technique, play it again, have someone else move out of the location, and then you pick it up with your other survival technique, and then you move out of the location. So for only one action, you've essentially moved 3 people. Yes, it requires a lot of cards to get there, but that's kind of just like the nature of this deck. So it's actually like a pretty simple idea for when you want to put these all down. You want to put shortcut down so people can move in and out. You can also leave some shortcuts behind if like you're going to be moving around the map and you're not parking on one location. Map the areas for the locations where you're going to be staying for a while, and barricade put down if enemies are starting to get a little bit spooky, scary. On to the next part of this deck, which is the Farsight portion of this deck. We have 18 events in this deck. So Farsight is going to do a lot of work for us, and that's ultimately why I decided to make this a Farsight deck, because I think it just works in tandem really well with the survival technique idea. Because now our barricades are fast, our map the areas are fast, and the problem with map the area and barricade, I mean, less of a problem with map the area and more of a problem with barricade, is the tempo that you put into the card is not necessarily worth the effect that you get out of it. So it makes barricade playable, and it makes map the area actually really damn good. Staying at 8 cards should actually be relatively pretty easy, because we have both Dream Enhancing Serum as a 1 of and Laboratory Assistant as a 2 of. Both these cards increase our hand size, and they also give us more card draw, which is exactly what we want. And they're also both science assets, which works really well with Kate Winthrop's ability. This is when I said for Dream Enhancing Serum, the cards that you pick up with Survival Technique are added into your hand. They are not drawn into your hand. So you do not get the bonus card from Dream Enhancing Serum if you pick up a barricade and you already had a barricade in your hand. We'll say don't neglect Laboratory Assistant's role in this deck. Don't get too attached to one in play if you have one in hand. They are here to give you more cards and take horror for you or damage for you. So a defeated Lab Assistant means that you're going to be drawing 2 more cards, and then that first defeated Lab Assistant is going to be back in the future, so you can draw her again. Last card here we have to round out our opening hand package is Studious. So it gives us a little kickstart, giving us 14 cards to find our 1 of Farsight or our 2 of Survival Techniques. We want to be able to hit, I think, we definitely want to be able to hit a Farsight and a Survival Technique in our opening hand, and this allows us to be more consistent with it. I think Farsight is the thing you want to hit first, because Farsight enables your card draw, which allows you to find your Survival Technique and start getting that loop going. So Studious just helps us with that. Since I classified this as a support deck, we need to add some tools to help deal with enemies, because we're a support and we want to flex. Our goal is to help the game when needed while making it easier for our allies. I decided on 2 I've Got a Plans and 2 I've Got a Plan 2s and 2 Existential Riddle. I'm talking too fast. It happens to me. Sometimes I just talk too fast. So I've Got a Plan can drop a good load of damage onto a big enemy, but it also gives you +2 to the book test. That's why I went for the upgraded version, because it is a big change to get that +2 book, especially because we don't have any book boost in this deck. We do have cards that we can commit, like Perception 2 and Kate's ability to boost further, but that is why I decided to go with the upgraded version for this deck. Speaking of Kate's ability, clues on assets Kate controls still count as clues that Kate has for I've Got a Plan. So just because they're on your assets does not mean you don't have them anymore. Something to keep in mind. Existential Riddle is just an awesome card. It's a very nice Arkham Horror the Card Game card, and you'll be consistently testing this at 0. Even more if you have a Map the Area in play, you can joke, haha, I'm at -1, ha ha ha. And then also it being fast. Both these cards being fast with Farsight is a really nice time. Continuing on, it's time to talk about our economy. We always have economy in our decks, both in the form of resources and card draw, all the time. Burning the Midnight Oil and Crack the Case are both active resource economy. This means that it's economy that you gain while also advancing the game. Compare this to something like an Emergency Cache, where you have to spend an action to gain 3 resources. Burning the Midnight Oil only gives you 2 resources, but you do it while investigating. So it's active economy, so you get a little bit less, because you are also, winning the game while playing the card. They don't ask a lot. They can sit in your hand until needed, meaning they work very nicely with Dream Enhancing Serum. We also have Deep Knowledge and Perception as 2 of our consistent card draw tools, giving us more card draw when needed. You may be asking if a big hand deck needs a lot of card draw, even when your hand is full, and the answer is yes, because it gives you more options and cycles your deck. Deep Knowledge, look at both Deep Knowledge and Burning the Midnight Oil, and add the little asterisk to them that they become better when they are played fast. So with Farsight, it feels a lot nicer to play these cards as well in your deck. These next two cards, they're also card draw, but I'm not including them in the economy section of this deck. They are, but they aren't. Instead, these two cards, both one-ofs in the deck, exist as panic buttons. There are rare, unavoidable moments where even a studious mulligan can turn its back on you. This means you don't hit your survival techniques or your Farsight because for some reason they're in the bottom part of your deck. And it will happen. It will happen. But because we really want to hit them, we want to spend, we don't want to have to spend our card draw, but if it does happen, we need to spend card draw. And that's why I'm including both Glimpse the Unthinkable and Thorough Inquiry as one-ofs, because these are burst card draw. These are huge chunks of card draw that can help you if things aren't going well. If you need to just find a specific card, 5 cards is a lot. And like if you have 7 cards in hand and you draw this, it becomes 8. You then get the extra value out of it. So you're going to be basically wheeling your hand in the hopes of finding what you were looking for. I've used Glimpse the Unthinkable a lot actually as a panic button to find the cards I need, and it works very well for that role. Notably, I've played Thorough Inquiry, but not in this role, but I think it does a good job for it. If you have the cards you're looking for, they also commit for 2 book, or in Thorough Inquiry's case, also 2 foot. But one thing that's cool with Thorough Inquiry is that with Farsight, you can play it for only 1 action, which is pretty good. 5 cards for 1 action and 2 resources. That's a rate that you probably won't mind playing the majority of the time. Last 2 cards here, nice and simple. Magnifying Glass and Deduction, just 2 cards that are, good cards. They're good cards. Magnifying Glass gives you a little book boost. It's also a tool card for Kate's ability. And Deduction means more clues. Even though it's a support deck, we still want to pick up clues when needed. I think that Deduction works really well for this deck as well because we don't have a lot of ways to expedite our clue getting process. So if we're on a map the area and the Shroud becomes 1, we say, hey, I'm just going to grab these 2 clues. Kluver, you can do some stuff here and I'll meet you over there and start making it easier for you this next turn. So it just allows you to hit that almost player amount of clues that you should be getting as a support when needed. Upgrade order. This was kind of just the upgrade order that I would follow when I was doing this, but as always, adjust to how you find the deck performs and fill any gaps as needed. I think our important first aid experience is going to go to 2 survival techniques and a Farsight 4. You could reasonably take an In the Thick of It and take a survival technique 2 and a Glimpse the Unthinkable. I think that's not a terrible way to start. I always feel like I'm cheating though, putting In the Thick of It in these decks if I do them in a deck video, so that's why I don't do it. But I think that the 2 Eureka's should turn into survival techniques 2 pretty soon, first upgrade. Alternatively, also the Farsight as your first upgrade can be really good. I grouped those 2 together because it's kind of just preference. If you get 6 XP, don't think too hard, put in a survival technique and a Farsight and just have a great time doing it. We got to take out one of the Dream Enhancing Serums because it takes up an Arcane slot, and so does Farsight. Next up, these upgrades, I think the only one that's important is Shortcut 0 to Shortcut 2 because it gives you more pieces to play with your survival technique, and that's why I think that's a pretty nice upgrade to do. Otherwise, I think the other ones are kind of just in the order you see fit. What you feel like your deck needs at the time, just kind of grab it and go. There's obviously also more you can do with this deck as you upgrade further, but I'm going to leave that to you and make the fun decisions that come with that. But the rule is, whenever you're upgrading, unless you find you don't need the economy, don't cut your economy for upgraded cards. As hard as it is, you're going to want to grab other cards. You can get rid of the Thorough Inquiry if your deck's doing fine as you go further in the upgrades. Oh, and then also, I guess also the Studious. I forgot to include it on this slide because I always do in my mind it was only the cards you take out. But I'd probably put the Studiouses somewhere in there. If you get a few experience, if you get 5 experience, put in a Studious in the Perception 2. Kind of just divvy it out as you go. You're the support deck. You don't have to do everything, right? So if you're making it easier for your teammates, then, you can go a bit slower in some other aspects. And you don't need to be a perfectly rounded, efficient deck completely, because that is the job for your Goon and your Kluver. And that's the deck. This deck's a good time. It's a good time. And I think that you might enjoy it if you kind of a unconventional Kate Winthrop deck, which I think this is a pretty good showcase of it. It still has a lot of Seeker stuff in it. It's still very Seeker, but I got bad news for you, kid. Kate Winthrop is actually still just very seeker. she's a seeker, right? So she's going to still have that. But it was fun playing around with survival technique, and I hope you enjoy it too. If you did not hear in the Wilson Richards video, I'm going to be releasing a deck list for each of the Hemlock Vale investigators on the channel. And for each build, I'll be looking at doing something a little bit off-kilter. At least off-kilter for me. Not off-kilter for everyone out there, because I'm a pretty... my deck building is pretty... It's all about efficiency. That's me. So I'm trying to look at, like, not my normal form of it. So I'm having fun doing this, and I hope you look forward to Alessandra's deck, which should be in 2 weeks. And then when I'm done this, I think I'm going to be starting a Roland Banks a core set and going through everything. So it should be fun. I want a huge thank you to all of our patrons for supporting the channel. If you want to support the channel, do so by liking, commenting, subscribing, all that cool stuff. And if you want to go the extra step, please feel free to join the Patreon. Have a good one, and as always, the GGs.